Hey guys, welcome to JT Mods. Today is the most excited I've been about any video that we've done here since we started the channel. Today we're going to play Mythbusters and we're going to take on the long-standing question of, does a cold air intake really do anything on a Jeep? Anybody that's watching this that spent any time in any forums or talked with anybody that really likes Jeeps has been in this conversation. So today we're going to look to solve that. I will say this, not all cold air intakes are made equal, so I can only speak to the results of this filter, but we are going to put the JT on a dyno to get to the bottom of, does a cold air intake really add horsepower and or torque? Does a cold air intake increase your miles per gallon for your fuel? And then, you know, just in the name of a cold air intake, does it really make air colder? So we're gonna find those things out. We've got some great tests in line for you today. So I'm really excited to get started. First, we're gonna test the stock intake. We're gonna run it through a couple of tests. We'll talk about that in detail as we get into those tests. But welcome to the channel. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Let's go ahead and hop into these tests. All right, so we've got 3 tests that we're gonna do before we pull the OEM intake off and put on our S&B air intake. The first thing is we're gonna check the sound. We've got a mic set up in the front seat. If you saw our best top, Sunrider top, you saw our sound test. So we've got an audio control RTA in the back, which is gonna measure our decibel levels. Really, we're doing this to make sure, really to show the difference between the stock intake from a noise level to the S&B. My personal desire is to get a little sound from it. I don't want it to be overwhelming in the cab, but we'll be able to show you that difference. The second thing that we're gonna measure, we're gonna use this Bluetooth dongle that connects down here to an app on my phone. The app is OBD Fusion. This is gonna allow us to measure the temperature of the air in the intake. So we'll measure it on the stock one, and then we'll measure it on the S&B. And then the final, or not the final, but the other thing that we've already measured is the miles per gallon for the fuel. Leading up to this video, I've been logging my mileage, tracking that so that I would have the stock aspect of that, and I can tell you the results of that. I've driven 250 miles, 80% of that was highway, 20% was in town, and the average miles per gallon is 15.3. I do want to caveat that with, I have not tried to maximize my mileage. That's just me driving the way that I drive. I will do that same test, 250 miles, 80-20 ratio, me just driving once we have the other intake on, and then we'll compare to see if the intake increased our miles per gallon. So those are the tests that we're going to do, and then finally Monday we're going to do the dyno test, but that's going to be after we install and do all those 3 tests I just named on the S&B filter, and then at the dyno we'll test the horsepower and torque of both the stock setting and the S&B. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in and get some testing. All right, so before we get started, before we take off, we're going to take our first reading here from a sound perspective, sitting still. So I'm going to just get quiet real quick. We're going to take a reading on the RTA, and then we'll do a quick rev. All right, so now we're going to do a quick rev to 3,000 RPMs and hold. All right, I think we're ready to go. We'll take one more sound reading at 55 miles an hour and at 70, while we're also getting our intake temperature readings. So we're getting ready to get on the highway. What we've learned in prepping for this video is that the JT's operating temperature on this gauge is the engine coolant temperature is about 195. And what that means is that the JT has to reach its operating temperature before it becomes a closed loop system. So we want to make sure that, one, it's at its operating temperature so that we can get a good intake air measurement, temperature measurement. So we have that. We've reached over operating temperature. We're good. My watch says it's 77 degrees outside right now. And so we'll try to do at least a comparable temperature. The reading right now on the ambient air temperature says 86. That normally will cool down to close to what it is outside once we start driving. And so we're gonna get, like I said, we're gonna get on this highway. We'll run the same route once we have the S&B on, and we'll get to 55 and we'll get a decibel measurement, and we'll get to 70 and we'll get a decibel measurement, all while tracking the air intake measurement for the temperature. So after we make this loop, we should have all of the measurements we need for the intake, for the stock intake, so that we can compare to the S&B once we get it on. So sit back and enjoy the ride. So we keep on our way to the highway, we keep having to stop, and the ambient air temperature is coming down as we're going, because you've got the air coming in, cooling off under the hood and in the intake, and then we stop and you see it start to rise. Slow down a little bit. All right, we're gonna get on it, hear what it sounds like. So we got a good clip to compare to. All right, so we're gonna bring the speed down to 55 so that we can get a measurement on the sound. So actually set the cruise for that. All right, so we're at a solid 55. Now we're going to take it on up to 70. All right, so we're now set at 70. Getting our sound clip good on that, and we're, like I mentioned earlier, we've seen the intake drop, the intake temperature drop. So we're currently at 87.8, and the ambient is down to 80.6. So I think we've got a good amount of measurement. We're going down the highway. We'll look for an exit to turn around and go back. Then we'll go ahead and install the S&B. And as long as the temperature stays the same, we'll run the same test today. If the temperature rises a lot, we'll run it tomorrow. As the temperature's rising, we'll catch the right temperature. We just want to make sure we have a good apples to apples. Now that we have all the driving tests completed, I did want to take a little bit of time just to show you a few things on the factory intake before we uninstall. The first thing, if you can see here, this is where the air is taken in for the factory intake. So you've got an intake here, it goes back kind of behind the headlight, and some of it will come in through here as well, ultimately being kind of channeled into this duct, which then carries it through the filter and then into the engine. The reason I want to point that out is I've very specifically selected the S&B air intake because it follows this same type of design. Some of the cons with doing a cold air intake is a lot of people worry about, am I going to be more susceptible to getting water sucked into my engine? With the one I chose, I don't feel like I'm not concerned about that because it's the same design, the same height that you could go with your OEM intake. You can go with the S&B intake for water. So secondly, you see this box, you cannot see inside of it. To check your filter, you have to remove it. You have to take out several screws to be able to check your filter. You'll see the S&B has a clear top. You can see your filter. You take 4 bolts out, you can get to your filter. It's easier to change. Also, some of the more fancy intakes that have a chrome intake pipe, they look really great, but they can offset the benefit of a cold air intake. So although they possibly could cool the air, a lot of times they create a heat soak in the engine bay. Because they're made of metal, they make the engine bay hotter, so therefore potentially you're taking in hotter air than you would have with your stock intake. And then although you may be cooling it, it may not be enough to offset the increase in the heat. So that's just a couple of things I wanted to point out specifically about the OEM intake and why I chose the S&B. We're going to go to the table here in a minute, take a look at it, and you'll see what I'm talking about as far as the design. So let's go ahead and jump into that before we get that one installed and get this one taken off. All right, so now for the fun part. We're gonna unbox the SMB intake and air filter. Just for reference, today I think it's the only one available that SMB has out for the JT, but the part number is 75-5121D. So if you're interested, there's the part number. I have inventoried this, so we're not gonna inventory it, but here we've got some of the grommets, some of the different grommets. I'm gonna prefab and put a lot of that stuff together just to make the install go quicker. But I did want to show you what all comes with it. You got the intake tube there, logo. The actual filter. Speaking of the filter comes oiled or dry. I chose the dry just for less maintenance, but definitely your preference. Here's the actual filter box. So you'll see where that takes place at the OEM like I kind of showed you before. The remainder is really just your hardware clips. And finally, it's covered now, but the clear plastic top that SMB's famous for. So looking forward to getting this on. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and uninstall the factory intake. But before we do, I did want to mention one thing. It's really important, specifically because of some of the tests we're doing. The JT does not have a mass airflow sensor, so it works off of speed density. So you know, if you're familiar with that, basically both of those processes work to figure out the ratio between air and fuel that's needed for the vehicle. So I'm going to actually leave a link in the description that kind of talks about the difference between mass airflow sensors and speed density. Speed density method was used a while back, but it's starting to make its way back into some of the newer vehicles. So I did want to mention that. That's why we're not measuring mass airflow sensor. So we're not measuring that to see if the cold air intake actually brings in more air. So that's the other thing about SMB. So SMB's product, they do not guarantee, or they don't tie a horsepower increase to their product. However, they do tie increased airflow. So I think it's 18% is what it says with this product. 18% increased airflow, more efficient. So anyways, I did want to mention that because the first thought that came to my mind until I started kind of looking into the JT was, well, I could monitor the mass airflow sensor and see if that's true. But they don't have one. So I did want to mention that. All right, now we're going to jump into the uninstall or the removal. The first thing it says is to go ahead and remove the negative on the battery. So we're going to do that real quick. And then I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the uninstall. I'm just going to kind of roll through it. I'll talk as I go. It's not a very difficult, of course I'll lose the bulb, but it's not a very difficult uninstall or install. So one thing that is important, these grommets, you do have to reuse these grommets. So if they come out, you have to make sure that you take them off and then you can put them back in. Let me show you real quick where they go. So I'll pull these off and put those back in before I mount the new box in those two holes there. Also, wait one second. While we had this open, this is what I was showing you in the front. So in the front of the Jeep, where I was showing you the hole where the intake comes in through the grill, this is exactly what I was talking about. So it comes up, this is gonna stay in place, and it's gonna work with the SMB. Comes right in and feeds right in to the box. So I thought that was important to note. So that's it for the removal. Pretty simple process. I do want to quickly show you one thing, just because I think it's important for the test that we're doing. I'm gonna pull the cover off of the OEM intake just to show you, and it probably won't be a surprise to you that JT's only got 6,000 miles on it, but it has a clean filter. I think that's important for some of the testing we're doing. We're putting a new filter on, brand new. If it were to show positive results, I would just want you to see and know that the one that we are replacing is clean as well. So I'm gonna just quickly do that. All right, so as you can see, not that the filter hasn't been used, right? I mean, it's been used, but obviously it's nowhere near needing changed. So we've got a good clean filter in there for these tests. All right, so one thing that I did forget to show you as far as the removal is you do take this one 10mm bolt out of the battery box here, and that's where our filter box is going to connect. So that was the last thing on the removal. Let's go ahead and I'll show you. I didn't do it all on film, but I did prep a lot of the install to go in. So we've got, this is the old intake tube. You do have to remove the IAT sensor out of here. Twist, pull out, then you're done with that. So I'm gonna go ahead, put it in. Turn. And then we will also need to install this here. Just get hand tight. Once it's hand tight, you just need to do 2 more rotations with the 3/4 wrench on the actual filter box. All the grommets, I installed one here, and then this is the liner for the box. Really simple, it just tucks in so that that's ready to go. And then as I showed you earlier, the grommets that are back in the Jeep, they go here. Snaps in. I will drop the filter in. This actually probably should have went on first. If I were doing it again, I probably would put this on before I tighten that down. But nonetheless, we'll get it on. All right, so the last thing to do is to put our clear top on. So I'm gonna go ahead and install this. I'm gonna recheck everything, make sure everything's tightened down, and then we'll come back at a final look, reconnect the battery, and I'll show you the final result. All right, so now that we have it all finalized and buttoned up, I did want to give you a last look at how it looks from an aesthetics perspective. So I think it looks great. I love the plexiglass clear to be able to see the filter. As I mentioned earlier, the form, fit, and function is very similar to the OEM, which I like. I feel confident with. So looking forward to kind of seeing the performance results, seeing our tests, seeing how they turn out. The other thing I did want to mention about this specific kit that I chose it, this was part of the reason, is they actually offer an addition to this kit to make the cowls on the hood functional. So as you know, if you have a Rubicon already, they're just plastic, they look great, but they don't do anything. So they actually have a kit that you can add to this intake to open up one of the cowls and connects directly to the box so that you can get more air in. So S&B, if you're watching, send me a kit, let me test it out for you. I'll run it through the dyno, I'll run it through the same test. Would love to see the results. So with that being said, we're gonna jump in the truck, we're gonna knock out the 3 tests that we did earlier on the OEM, and then on Monday we'll head to the dyno and we'll finalize and we'll wrap up with our final results on how the intake performed and against the OEM. All right, hey guys. So it's the next day. I decided yesterday afternoon, to go ahead and wait until today to do our testing because there was more than a 10-degree difference in the temperature. So I wanted it to be apples to apples as much as possible. So here we are next morning. Right now, for my watch, which yesterday when we were recording this, I looked at my watch to say the temperature rather than the app. And yesterday when we started, it was 77. Right now it's 76. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start with our sound test, and then we're going to head to the closed loop to run the rest of our test, including the sound test. But obviously we don't need to do one. I guess we will do one at idle, so I'll get quiet real quick. We'll get a reading on that, and then we'll do one at 3,000 RPMs. All right, I think we have enough there, so we'll go ahead and rev up to 3,000 and hold, and we'll have a difference there. All right, so we got what we need there. From the ear test, I would imagine those two will be pretty much the same because I don't even hear, personally, I don't hear the intake. And then we'll do, like we did yesterday, getting on the highway, we'll gun it a little bit, see what it sounds like. And I will here go ahead and get a sound clip right quick for you, just kind of revving in the driveway. And then we'll head to the loop. So let's hear what it sounds like. So as you can tell, you can't really hear a ton. You know, you can hear it just a little bit deeper. I'll use the word everybody uses, throaty sound. But I will say, I have driven the truck. I drove it last night. I'm happy with the sound because I wasn't looking for an overly loud sound. So again, hopefully it comes through on the video. You're not hearing a lot. You will hear it when we get on the highway, and you'll be able to kind of hear the sound. So with that being said, let's go ahead and head to the closed loop and we'll start our testing. So we're getting close to the same loop. I've got everything set up. So we have reached operating temperature, which right now is a little over the normal, 195 at least is the operating temperature. So we've reached that. We've got everything set, so we're getting ready to get on the highway here, and we'll do like we did yesterday. We'll go ahead and speed up to get on the highway to hear the sound. We'll get on the highway, we'll check 55 miles an hour for a sound test, and we will check 70 miles an hour for a sound test, all while monitoring the intake temperature versus the ambient temperature. So just take a quick ride here and get all the data. I like doing Mythbusters. This is fun. So I'm really excited to kind of see what the results are. S&B, puts out a great product, so I feel optimistically cautious, maybe this is the way to say it, that we're going to see positive results. So I'm excited to see. And as much as I don't want to, I'm going to go ahead and cut the air off for the sound test. So if I start sweating, that's why. All right, here we go. Gonna get on the highway here. So as you can hear it, definitely a lot louder sound than the OEM intake, as you would expect. So again, that's all preference. If you don't want it to sound that way, then completely understand. You know, I personally don't want it to be super loud on the trails. Now I say that I'm going to add exhaust next and test that next, but the goal is not to be annoying loud, you know, but to enjoy the sound. It is my daily driver, so again, it's just like anything with your Jeep, in my opinion. It's your Jeep, do what makes you happy. So, all right, we're going to slow down here and see if we can get set to 55 and put it on cruise. Make sure we don't get ran over. All right, so now that we're at 55, we've got the, sorry, I've got somebody behind me here, so I'm not real happy with me, I don't think, but anyways, we're at 55. And I'm gonna be quiet so we can check the noise level. All right, I think we got what we need. We'll go ahead and move it up to 70 and set the cruise and do the same. Set at 70 on cruise. Again, I'm going to get quiet. I'm going to wait till this winding road straightens out a little bit, and then we'll grab the sound measurement on this as well. I think we have enough to look at the data on the sound. I think we have enough with the intake versus the ambient temperature to look and see if it's any cooler air than the stock. So we'll go ahead and I'll turn the camera off and we'll loop back around. I think we have everything we need for now. So tomorrow we go to dyno. So I'm super excited about that. Never seen a dyno. So that's going to give us our final results. From there, we will we'll take all the results, we'll put it side by side, and then we'll show you the conclusion. So, okay, guys, now that we're done with the on-road test, we're going to go ahead and wrap up part one of a two-part series. Let's go ahead and look at the results that we have so far from our testing before we get into what's going to be on part two. So let's start out with our sound scorecard. So as you know, we measured the sound at idle, 3,000 RPMs, 55 miles per hour, and 70 miles per hour with the OEM intake and the SMB. If you're looking at the scorecard here, if you look to the right, the very far column, the delta column, that's really what's important. What was the delta? How much louder was the SMB? Now, if you look at it, on average, it was about 1 decibel louder. And to me, that's very minimal. It's really almost negligible, considering if you're considering getting a cold air intake, you expect a little additional noise level, which you're okay with, right? And the difference between these measurements and the actual feel, from my perspective, is that the only time I really notice the SMB intake is when I get on the throttle, which is when I want to notice it, right? That's kind of when you want to hear it. So that being said, I would say, what are the results? The results is the SMB slightly louder, right? I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's louder at the right times, in my opinion. So moving on to the next, let's look at the intake cooling scorecard. So what are we measuring here? How effective is the SMB intake at cooling the incoming air versus the OEM? Again, here the two columns you want to be focused on are the delta columns. The delta for the OEM is higher than the delta for the SMB intake. So what does that mean? It means that it cooled the air less. So as the ambient air temperature came in and it made it to the intake air temperature where we were measuring to see how much it cooled it, the SMB cooled it by quite a bit more, really, all things considered. So what are the results there? The SMB on average cooled the air 4.5 degrees more than the OEM, which I would say is pretty significant. Also, it really kind of is attributes to what SMB's claim is. SMB claims that their intake is more efficient. They don't claim higher horsepower. So by cooling the air, creating denser air, it is more efficient for your engine. So therefore, I would say that is in line with some of their claims. So I hope you've enjoyed the video so far. Again, I know it's been a lot of content, so we're going to break it into 2 videos. I hope you'll come back for part 2. Part 2 is going to be super exciting. JT goes to the dyno. We're going to take a look at the horsepower. We're going to take a look at the torque, and we're going to finish our miles per gallon comparison, OEM versus SMB. So I hope you'll come back again and check that out. If you've liked this, you've enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe, make sure your notifications are on so that you'll know when we drop part 2, which I promise you will not be long. I've got a few things to wrap up on it. Hopefully it'll definitely be within a week of dropping this, maybe sooner. So again, for all of you that have been supporting us, thank you. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the content. Thanks.